Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
Thanks for the idea, by the way. What have you done?
Well, we were talking about it. We were talking about, in auto racing with the drive-through penalty being given during the race. And I would just say that, we had the Indy 500 qualifying last weekend. You ended up with two drivers that had some issues that ended up being put at the back of the pack. Maybe the Democrats should all start with 10 points down next election.
Oh, I'd like that too. That's good. Yeah, they should just say you have to automatically you look at the past election cycles in whatever race that they are running in, and the typical percentage number of individuals that vote, and they just have to have so many votes removed from the vote tally.
Yeah, it's like a golf handicap.
It's brilliant. All right, let's go here. Big news yesterday, Minnesota Star-Tribune and other outlets reporting that several metro area high school softball players are suing the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and other state leaders to remove the transgender athletes from their sport. The lawsuit filed in an organization representing the players from two high schools. Female Athletes United alleges that in the suit that a decade-old Minnesota policy allowing transgender athletes to play has created an unsafe environment, unfair competition for Maple Grove High and Farmington High players. The suit focuses on an unnamed metro area player who the plaintiffs allege was born male. It's really interesting, too, and I think it's worthy to note that we're seeing these types of moves not just here in Minnesota, but across the country. And it speaks to how it takes some time when these controversies arrive for, these lawsuits to move forward, for individuals to coalesce to push back against a particular issue. And now we're certainly starting to see that as these women move forward with these particular lawsuits. What do you think about this one against Keith Ellison?
Well, this one's a big deal, John. I read through the complaint last night. It's in federal court here in Minnesota, so not decided by a flurry of Walz and Dayton appointees in state court. I don't know if they've assigned a judge yet, but I always think it's a little bit more scrutiny in federal court. This is a serious case. It's brought under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which is, of course, the section of law, federal law, that attempted to, rectify disparities in sports between males and females, and trying to create more opportunities for women's sports at high school and college level. And so they're alleging constitutional violations here by, just for the listeners' background, remember that the Trump administration, President Trump issued an executive order, a series of executive orders, but one of them was keep men biological males out of women's sports. And almost immediately, Attorney General Ellison and the Minnesota State High School League said they were going to review the order, but they were intending to continue their current policy, which, as you stated, was to allow for transgender athletes to compete, meaning that biological males can compete in women's sports. And so that's what this lawsuit is challenging, is that decision to basically, ignore not only the executive order, but also the Protect Women and Girls in Sports Act and all those things. And this is serious implications, John, because, as a constitutional claim brought in federal court, the state can be on the hook for attorney's fees if they lose. So I've seen situations in the past where the Attorney General's office has not prevailed and wound up having, we're talking here, we're having a special session likely to deal with a budget. We're dealing with a budget deficit. This is, why not just throw some attorney's fees on there too?
According to the suit, the plaintiffs all believe that it is unsafe and unfair to play against a male athlete, particularly in softball, and that the female athletes are at a significant disadvantage against the male athletes. Additionally, they reasonably fear that they could be injured per the suit, which describes the player as the dominant pitcher. The plaintiffs are seeking the benefits of competing against only women and girls in athletic competitions. And it's interesting, like you mentioned. I mean, this is kind of a big deal because there's going to have to be some specific definitions that are adhered to here, wherein the left wants to go and classify an individual identifying as trans as a woman or a girl. I mean, per this lawsuit, I mean, the courts are going to have to end up making decisions that could have sweeping consequences even beyond this lawsuit, right? I mean, is this where we're kind of where we're heading on this, Jeff O'Brien?
Yeah, The lawsuit kind of breaks down between, a couple different angles. You mentioned about the personal safety issue. There's a talk about, loss of competing in state tournaments, loss of scholarships. But yeah, they also mentioned in the complaint, the other executive order that the president signed, where he defined for federal purposes that there were two genders, male and female, which contradicts what the state law says, and part of the argument that the plaintiffs are making is a preemption argument that Title IX and the federal law, in this case, preempts what the state law says. So yeah, there's going to be some serious decisions to be made here. I almost think, John, that Attorney General Ellison doesn't mind that this case is being brought because this is as other guests on your show talked about in the past. This is an 80-20 issue for Republicans, this issue of biological males and girls sports. And we saw last week, the governor trying to agree as part of the budget framework to remove health care protections from undocumented immigrants was enough to have half his caucus out pounding on the door at the press conference. It's almost like the Democrats are, have this car screaming, towards a cliff with a brick on the accelerator. And I'm guessing Ellison's office maybe even welcomes this lawsuit. It's like, great, well, let the courts decide it so we don't have to get primaried.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a number of things going on here. I mean, one, what you're speaking to is kind of what I kicked the show off with this morning. The narrative and the agenda on the left is priority one. Everything else is secondary, even on these 80-20 issues. I mean, some of these are leaning more towards 90-10 for crying out loud. They want to be able to have the show of force and the activism to give off the perception that there is a larger majority of individuals that support these issues than they really do. I think the same thing rings true when it comes to Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. I think she invites these controversies. I think she does these moves because she's a firm believer, but at the same time, she also wants to take up that fight because it's part of how they operate. They operate through this type of opposition. And you're right. At the end of the day, even if the court rules against him, they can just go and blame the court. They won't take responsibility feeling like they've been exonerated or they've been chastised. They'll just say, well, that's on the court. That's not on us, guys. We still stand by our own truth. I absolutely agree with you on that front.
Yeah. There's no question that I think they would like to see this issue go away, but they can't. The Attorney General could enter into a consent decree here with the plaintiffs and agree, and they could. There could be changes to between the state and the Minnesota State High School League policies, but they're not going to do that because they aren't going to want to have the blowback from it.
So let's move through a couple of these other items because I have some clips from this Walz commencement speech at the University of Minnesota, and I'll have more to share later on in the show because there was a lot that wasn't covered based off of the controversies from that commencement speech, including some things relating to lawyers that I want to ask you about. And there's some talkbacks that rolled in as we talk with lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien. But let's talk about these two other issues briefly. Couple of wild stories. One, a woman has filed medical malpractice, a lawsuit against Allina Health because the surgical staff and Allina Health, alleging that the wrong organ was removed. So apparently she came in for concerns about an infection or rupture to her spleen. It was recommended that she undergo surgery to have her spleen removed, but instead a kidney was removed. Now, after the surgery, she was diagnosed with splenic abscess, left kidney removal, respiratory failure, diastolic heart failure. On top of that, remained in the hospital due to complications from the surgery. She's been since diagnosed with stage 5 kidney disease, which they say is a direct result of the removal of her kidney. Now, she's only seeking $50,000 in attorney's fees, but Allina Health in their response said that the court's findings don't accurately reflect the full picture. of the patient's condition. So this is an interesting one because, I mean, either you removed the right, organ or you didn't. I'm not sure what other details could unfold that could end up exonerating the, Allina Health and the surgeons here. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll say this. First of all, with regards to the $50,000 damages, that's a procedural rule, John. If your damages exceed $50,000, you only have to plead that number. So my guess is their damages claim is far in excess of
Gotcha.
$50,000. But what's curious about this now, the areas I practice in are transactional, corporate stuff, real estate stuff. But I get a lot of referrals from a lot of different things, and so I know enough to be dangerous about other areas here. And I've had cases, clients that have had injury cases, med mal, personal injury. I've been in the room during the consults and the discussion, so I know enough about how the process works. But what's curious about this is that it's gone to court. I mean, if this and this is why I'm kind of playing lawyer ball here and hedging my bet with what Allina said. It looks on its face like a really bad story, really bad facts for Allina, but they don't. If this was as bad as it seems to be, they would have wanted to settle this and make it go away.
Interesting.
Before it ever gets to this point. So there's something else I would say probably going on here as to why it got as far as going to court. I'm going to keep an eye on this one.
Okay.
I'd be curious to see how this plays out. Because it sounds like right now what's happened is there's been a complaint filed, which of course when you only see the complaint, it always looks bad for the other side until the other side gets a chance to respond and then starts to even things out. So there's a lot. I think there's going to be a lot to play out here. Sad story if it's true that the woman is going through these types of medical issues as a result of this. But I guess we'll just have to keep our eyes on it because there may be more here than what the story is letting on.
And this almost is worthy of a lot more time, but we can just discuss it briefly. A judge has dismissed this lawsuit filed by a St. Louis Park woman who was upset with her neighbor's basketball hoop. Julia Ramos asked the judge to bar the boys from playing on their driveway basketball hoops. So essentially it breaks down. There was a hoop installed. It was a combined gift from the parents to these two boys, to their sons. And the neighbor next door didn't like the fact that the boys were playing basketball so close to their home. As a matter of fact, at one point she complained that the hoop was too close to the property line, so they actually moved the hoop. Then she was talking about the ball bouncing into their yard, saying that they were trespassing. At one point, the neighbor complaining sent a cease and desist order to the family, drafted by the attorney, getting upset, threatening defamation for continuing to tell their side of the story. But in the end, the judge essentially ended up throwing out the complaints of the neighbor against the family and the boys playing basketball in their driveway. But what were your thoughts on the results of this lawsuit?
Well, a couple of things. I noticed that the plaintiff, the party that brought the lawsuit, is apparently an attorney and could basically do their own legal work. So that's a nice, stain on the profession that that this is what they're taking their time doing. Minnesota's a notice pleading state, so it's a pretty low bar to get into court. Fortunately, the judge dismissed it. But we as lawyers, we have standards of ethics, and you want to behave in a certain way. And I don't know about going after a family because there are two kids playing basketball next door bothers you. Maybe you should, maybe it's time to go for the senior community or something. I don't know. This was just, fortunately the court, dismissed it, but it's just unfortunate this whole thing had to be brought.
Lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, I have some talkbacks that rolled in. I also have these two clips from Governor Tim Walz. It's a short break coming up. Can you hang on the line and spend a little bit more time with us?
Absolutely.
All right. Hang on the line. If you have any questions for lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, we will try to get those in. I know a few of you have already left them. And like I said, this commencement speech to the graduate students at the University of Minnesota is a lot more egregious than even what you've heard here on the show as the Trump administration speaks out against the comments that Governor Tim Walz made. And in that, there were also some comments relating to being lawyers, obviously. You wouldn't know that if you listened to the first half of Walz's speech, which I'll share with you after 7:30. But we'll play a couple of clips from Walz in this commencement speech, and we'll get the thoughts from Jeff O'Brien and your comments from the iHeartRadio app. Plus, we'll continue to take your talkbacks all morning long, given we're in the middle of the biggest scandal in modern politics, and it's because of Democrats. What should their penalty be after all the damage that they've done to America?
Penalties should be that prior to each news story, they should read off their discretions, and each written article, they should list at the top each one of their discretions.
Hey, John. Tom from Michigan. Great show. Hey, how about this for a punishment for the libs? They have to admit that they lied on TV, in their interviews, on their debates, on their advertising, in the fine print.
Seems to be a theme.
On the advertisements, everywhere that their message is coming out, they need to have a disclaimer that they were proven to lie.
Good morning, and I love your show.
Hour 2, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM. Jon Justice. If you're listening on the iHeartRadio app, leave us a talk back. We have a question of the day today. So what should the Democrat penalty be after all the damage they've done to America? When you are playing sports, and people often talk about politics like it's sports, when you commit a foul or a violation, there's usually a penalty involved. And since we're in the middle of the biggest and most consequential scandal in modern politics, we're taking your suggestions on what those penalties should be. So we'll continue to do this throughout the show this morning. And I have to thank our guest lawyer extraordinaire, Jeff O'Brien. He was the one who gave me the suggestion talking earlier this week. And so far, I've been pretty pleased with the response. Jeff, we do have some questions that have rolled in for you, though, from the iHeart Radio app. Before I play you a couple of clips from this commencement speech that I want to get your thoughts on, where Walz actually talks about, being a lawyer during this University of Minnesota law student graduate commencement speech. But let's go here.
Morning, John. I don't have a penalty for the Democrats, but I do have a question for the lawyer extraordinaire, and that is, if the session is over, why is there still legislators there negotiating a deal? It seems to me that they should need to do the negotiation while the session is on, while all the legislators are there and have a chance to have a say in this, rather than a few of them getting together, doing the deal, and then calling a session and forcing everybody to vote on just that one deal.
Well, I can answer this as well. Jeff, you're welcome to comment. I think the easy answer is that, well, there's a rule in play. There's a time frame for the legislative session to take place, and if they don't get the work done within that time frame, then it goes to a special session, and the negotiations need to continue. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, though, Jeff?
Well, the caller makes a good point. Why this seems to be, no matter who's in charge on either side, the leaders get in the room and hammer out a deal and then tell everybody what they're voting for in some big, massive, budget bill at the end, coming in the wee hours at the end of session or special session. So I agree, this is not the way to pass legislation, but this has been going on for at least a decade or more.
Yeah. Let's go here.
Good morning. I was wondering if the lawyer extraordinaire could better explain the definition of due process. I always thought that was referring primarily to the threat of being put in jail by your government. So when we're sending illegal aliens back to the country they came from, due process wasn't something that necessarily applied, because we're just sending them back to their country, not putting them in jail here.
And this is relevant, too, when we get to the other clips from Governor Tim Walz in his commencement speech, because he actually goes on about due process at one point to those university law grads. But what are your thoughts on that, Jeff O'Brien?
Well, it's a good question. So due process doesn't just pertain to criminal matters. Any time that the government is acting towards, one of its citizens or a business or whatever, there has to be there can't be these, there can't be a reflexive, determination and an order without any further proceedings. You always have a chance, a notice and opportunity to be heard is sometimes how we hear it. But due process applies in a number of different contexts. It's just a matter of being heard, before the government takes some action.
All right, let's go here. There's some talkbacks that rolled in. I want to have an opportunity to kind of look at them. But there was a couple of clips during this commencement speech and that Walz gave. Now, did you watch the entirety or just what I sent you there, lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien?
So I watched just the clips that you alerted me to, and then I had heard the kind of the more general statements that he made about ICE and the Gestapo comment and things like that. But I had not heard, until you sent them to me, John, I had not heard what he had said about lawyers and law firms.
Well, it took him a while to actually get there. I mean, the first half of the speech, and I'll share it with everybody later on this hour, like it is an incredibly partisan political speech. I mean, completely void of any sort of thought that perhaps not everybody in the room is a liberal. I mean, it really is stunning when you hear the entirety of it. But he then actually goes and speaks about things regarding what these graduates will inevitably end up doing in practicing law. Here's the first clip.
What you stand for is what makes America America. If we don't fight back now, why did we get elected and why did we become attorneys to defend the law? But there are those with power and money that are choosing not to fight. And that brings me to, I guess, a touchy subject maybe here. Big law. Granted, getting singled out by executive orders by the President of the United States will scare the crap out of you. Trust me, I get it. And I know it probably spooked their clients. But as any 1L here could tell you, those executive orders carry about the same constitutional authority as a ransom note. And the quality of the writing is about the same, too. Those firms are home to some of the nation's top-flight lawyers. These are folks that know how to throw a punch. So did they fight back? Well, some did, and guess what? They've gone to court and won almost every case they fought back on.
I think it's one of the first times I've heard big law. I don't think I've heard big law before, but what were your thoughts on that clip from Governor Tim Walz?
Well, big law is a thing, my firm's considered big law. First of all, he has no idea what he's talking about. I love how he says we as if he's a lawyer. He's not. He gets sued by lawyers all the time. I was one of them years ago when he shut down all the bars and restaurants during COVID. He doesn't understand what law is about. I think it's interesting that, his attitude is that lawyers should stand up for, the oppressed and who, that was kind of his opening comment was about that. And my response to that is, where was he on lawyers standing up for January 6th defendants and or lawyers that had been working with the Trump campaign in the wake of the election that had their licenses suspended or revoked? So it only cuts one way with him. It's only his narrative in terms of what he thinks should be done. There's a lot more to the practice of law than fighting political lawsuits to further a political agenda. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't even know why he would be speaking at a law school commencement, given that he's not a lawyer. So more word salad coming out of Tim Walz's mouth.
Well, it was funny too because he's wearing the gown and the cap, and it was Catherine and Grace on the American Experiment podcast this week, and they were going over some of the clips like I am this morning, and they pointed out that they didn't understand why he was wearing the cap and the gown. They're like, I don't understand why he's. I mean, he knows the audience he's speaking to, but I guess he gave a commencement speech in a different state and was just wearing his normal suit. I mean, neither here nor there, but he looked ridiculous wearing that, and I think it speaks to what you were talking about a moment ago, that he's not a lawyer. Let me play this other clip, and this happened right after the audio we just played a moment ago.
But some of the biggest firms, the ones I'm talking about, they caved. I hope you haven't signed with them yet. Those feckless firms let Donald Trump shove them into a locker. Now they're at his beck and call to do his dirty work for free. I'm going to just name it. It's cravenly and cowardly, and that doesn't even begin to describe it. It's a flagrant betrayal of the oath they took as lawyers, the same oath I took as governor. the one that you're all about to take, to defend the rule of law, come hell or high water.
Your thoughts there, Jeff O'Brien?
What would be really funny is when he's out of office and looking for some cushy consulting or lobbying gig and he wants to go to one of these big law firms. I hope they remember this speech. Which could be, sooner than later. All right, Let's sneak in a couple of talkback questions for you. I have more audio from Walz to get to here later on in the show.
Hey, John, just wanted to know why more people are not discussing the 22nd Amendment for two-term presidents. It does allow them to run as a vice president again. So just curious what your thoughts are on that for, say, Obama and Trump going forward.
Well, I think people aren't talking about it because it really isn't. It isn't an issue or anything that people are discussing. I think when it comes to a third term for Trump, I know we had a couple of people reaching out earlier this week. He's dismissed that and has moved off of it. But any thoughts on that, Jeff O'Brien?
Well, I think he had some fun with it, but yeah, he's confirmed in interviews that he doesn't want to do it. Whether or not what went on in the previous 4 years constituted a shadow Obama third term, that'll be the subject of some debate for years to come.
All right, two more here, and then we'll let you go this morning, talking with our lawyer extraordinaire, Jeff O'Brien.
Point one to the lawyer. He's not a lawyer, but he gets sued by him all the time.
A question for the lawyer extraordinaire. If they are doing the work of the people, why are they allowed to hide in a back room and plan stuff out of the eyes of the people? That doesn't seem right.
Well, I don't think they are allowed to go and do that, but you have any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, I don't think they're meeting in dark, smoky rooms. I mean, look, they're scrambling to try to put a budget together because one side took a extended vacation at the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
They're doing what they can.
No, 100%. And that's a point that's missed in all the coverage locally. Nobody wants to seem to point out that they were 3 weeks behind because the Democrats were acting like a bunch of juveniles and wouldn't show up for work. Lawyer extraordinaire, Jeff O'Brien, thank you for the time this morning. Also, thank you for the inspiration of today's question of the day. What should the Democrat penalty be after all the damage they've done to America? Did you have one in particular you wanted to share, or should we just say goodbye for this morning?
Let's start them all 10 points down in the midterms in next year.
Okay. I like that. 10 points down at the start of the election. I dig that. Jeff O'Brien.
At the back of the pack, just like the Indy 500.
Can I call you Big Law from now on?
Some people might call me Big Lawyer, but that's not nice.
Jeff O'Brien, thanks, man. It's great talking with you.
Good talking with you, John.